look at how the world is going to transform because of what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, because of this war in Iran. All right, so basically we're in a new world because our world today is built entirely on access to cheap petroleum products, cheap energy. Why are you allowed to be in school learning from me rather than the fields farming? Because of energy, right? Because of oil from the Middle East. Your computer is based on what? Petroleum. This camera that's filming me is based on what? Petroleum. This clothing? Petroleum. The medicine you eat? Petroleum. The food that you eat comes from fertilizers, which is based also on petroleum. So basically, everything in the world is based on cheap petroleum. The entire global economy, the main foundation is cheap petroleum. So what happens in a world where petroleum is not cheap? The other thing about the world is, this is the GCC countries, okay? And as you can see, this is really important to see, is around the year 2005, they started to have massive account surplus, meaning they were selling so much oil, they couldn't really spend all their money. Do you guys know why? What happened in 2005, 2004 that made these countries extremely wealthy? All right, China, okay? What's China doing? Well, China in the 80s and 90s was building factories, but then China itself developed this account surplus, so now China wants to develop its industrial base, right? And how do you do that? By importing oil from the GCC. And that's why we have these skyscrapers, these malls, these roads, because China was able to import all this cheap oil from the GCC. And then the GCC would take this money and then invest it back into the American stock market. But not just that, but they would invest it in Africa. They would invest in infrastructure. So for the longest time, the Chinese economy and the GCC are the two main pillars of the entire global economy. Okay? And what this means is that if the GCC no longer is able to export oil, this is going to have a major impact on China. And together, the two are going to have a major impact on the global economy. Okay, another thing that you may not be aware of is today, flying around the world, it's very, very simple to do. Get our mobiles out, go to the website, look at where we're going to fly to, and then book that flight for tonight. Take a taxi to the airport, get on a flight, and we're there the next morning. Guess what, guys? You couldn't do this 20 years ago, okay? The technology was around, but it was not widely available. Now, look at this, where the entire world is interconnected, okay? This is a pretty stark chart where in 1950, it was considered a tremendous luxury to fly. You had to be a millionaire, basically, to want to fly for vacation, okay? Everyone else just drove their car. Now, it's like anyone can drive. And this, of course, is because of Pax Americana, where Pax Americana will guarantee there's no conflict in the world, and therefore planes can just fly around. Otherwise, you'd be shut down. Well, this world is coming to an end. In the future, flights will be very expensive, and vacations will be unaffordable. This is the internet, guys. Yeah, you don't know this. You think that the internet is just that you go on the computer and then boom, the internet is there. No, actually the internet is undersea cables that connect the entire world. And unfortunately, there's a war going on right here, guys. Unfortunately, it's really easy for Iran to cut off the undersea cables, which would lead to internet disruption for maybe 20-30% of the world. Northern Africa, India, the Middle East, maybe parts of Europe will lose internet access. You think, okay, well that's fine. They just won't watch Netflix anymore. No, guys, okay? The entire global economy is based off the cloud. So if you want to bank, basically finance, okay? So this is going to have a huge impact in the world. And this can happen anytime, where for whatever reason, there's a war going on in the Strait of Hormuz, some cables get cut off, and then suddenly, you've lost internet access. And this would basically cause major disruptions throughout the world. So one thing that you notice about this world is the sheer amount of population growth, where after World War II, you see a massive boom in population. And unfortunately, this is not sustainable. It is not possible for the planet to sustain 8 billion people, many of whom want to fly around the world twice a year, who want to have food, who want to have avocados every single day. They want to have like cherries every single day, okay? This population growth is not sustainable. And basically what happens is this: when you are too off balance, when there's a correction, the correction is pretty extreme. So this chart by itself, the fact that we have so many people, means like if there's a crisis, the population will see a massive shrinkage, okay? You're like, okay, how? And the answer is food scarcity. Food is based on global trade, okay? So let me show you what I mean by this. The yellow, okay, are places that need fertilizer to grow food, meaning their land is not good for farming, so they need fertilizer to grow food. They also have a large population. As you can see, a lot of this is based in Africa and maybe Central Asia, parts of South America. Ammonia is a chemical produced from oil that is fundamental for fertilizers. As you can see, this is mainly in the north of the world. What allows for 8 billion people is the fact that the north is able to export fertilizer to the south. And that's it, guys. You understand? If this were to stop for whatever reason, people in the south would be in a lot of trouble. So as you can see, this trade in fertilizer is what sustains a global population of 8 billion people. Again, if there's a disruption to this trade, the people in the south are in a lot of trouble. So if you're in the green, you're okay? But if you are in the red, you are in a lot of trouble, okay? But honestly, if you are not in the green, you could still be in a lot of trouble, because again, what we're looking for is resilience. The idea of efficiency is, let's imagine the best case scenario and try to make as much money out of it as possible, okay? The idea of resilience is, let's imagine the worst case scenario and see if we can survive it. Basically, if you have food security issues, you are facing a massive problem, okay? Because again, we're imagining the worst case scenario. And again, I have to say this, but if you're not in the green, you should be worrying right now, okay? It's something that national leaders in the world have to start thinking about right now: food scarcity. Water. Again, the countries that suffer from food scarcity, some of them also suffer from water scarcity. Okay? So basically, this area, I would say that water is far more problematic than food. If you're any country in this area, you should be worried. Freedom is a very important issue, because freedom is actually important for resilience issues. Okay? And what this means is that when there's a crisis, leaders and the population need to collectively make sacrifices. But when there's very little freedom, meaning there's very little transparency and accountability, where the public don't have access to the leadership, then the leadership could possibly make selfish, self-defeating decisions. And the public is not involved, and therefore the public refuses to make the sacrifices necessary in order to make the nation survive, okay? And so this leads to conflict around the world. And again, countries that suffer the most from food issues and water issues also are most likely to come into conflict with other people. Another issue I want to bring up is the idea of megacities. And the idea of megacities is any cities that have over 10 million people. And you think, wow, spaces are amazing because you have like shopping malls and you have like skyscrapers. That's great. No, guys. Megacities are really bad. They exist because of globalization. Because what megacities do is they're able to bring in a lot of people, have them specialize in a particular area, make it industrial, and then export it to the rest of the world. And where are most megacities located? Well, they're located in India and in China. This is a problem because India and China both suffer from food and water issues. If you are to be resilient, you actually want most of your population not in cities, but in the countryside growing food. Because first of all, they are self-sufficient. Second of all, you will have a food supply. Unfortunately, right now, China imports a quarter of its food. And also remember, food also requires energy to grow. So China imports 75% of its oil. This brings up the question of how resilient is China. Okay, but not just China, but also any big country with a megacity. Again, if you're a national leader, you should be worried right now, okay? So, with this war and with disruptions to global trade, we should expect massive instability in nations that are not very resilient, okay? That have very little freedom, that have food issues, and which have water issues, okay? And so you would see revolutions, you would see wars, you would see famines, which leads to what? Which leads to massive migration. These are migration trends that we're already seeing where people from Africa, Middle East are moving to Europe, and people from South America and Latin America are moving to the United States. And we should expect these trends to not only continue, but to accelerate by maybe 100 times. And you think to yourself, okay, well, what Europe and North America can do is just build walls, right? They should right now build a wall because you're going to see a massive influx of refugees due to food and water issues. And unfortunately, Europe and North America have a huge problem. And the problem, of course, is aging. And this is 2050, where the entire Northern Hemisphere will have a significant elderly population, which means their only option is to bring in cheap, desperate workers from the South who are fleeing conflict zones in order to run their economies. The problem of this, of course, is that this will lead to cultural conflict where the local populations, native populations, will feel they're being replaced by these refugees and these immigrants. And this will probably lead to still conflict. And unfortunately, there's really no way around this issue. Okay, with the end of Pax Americana, what you will see emerge is regional trading blocks. Basically the idea of mercantilism, okay? And for most of human history, this was what we did, where there was no one power that controlled the entire world. What happened was that maybe you had a local hegemon which guaranteed trade among its allies, okay? And you didn't trade with other people, you only traded within your regional trading bloc. And that's the world we're heading back towards, okay? So this is a map of the 16th century, 17th century, where, you have these mercantile empires, like the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and they have their own trade networks. And they refuse to work with each other, but the system worked fine. It was more expensive, it was not so convenient, but it still works. So this does not mean the end of global trade, it just means much more limited global trade. Another thing that you will notice about the Asian economies is slaves were a very important part of the trade. And the reason why is this: you need energy to run your society. Today we use oil. Back then they used human beings. You can no longer have access to cheap oil. What you do is you enslave people. And that's the way historically we've done things. So the last thing I want to talk about is religion. Because remember, the idea of resilience is you need people to focus more on spirituality and less on materialism. Because if they focus on materialism, their lives are getting worse and worse. And if you are in the gray, you might have issues, okay? Why? Because your people are not religious and too materialistic. Unfortunately, East Asia, okay, Japan, China, Korea, Vietnam are especially non-religious. That's going to be a problem for them in the future, okay?